Welcome, everyone. Welcome back to the live stream. It's your host, Danny Dhaiphong. And as you can see, I am joined by special friends of the show and great analysts and journalists in their own right. We have Ali Abunimah from Electronic Intifada, and we have Professor Mohammad Marandi, analyst, as well as professor at the University of Tehran. Gentlemen, thanks so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Danny.
Thanks, Danny.
Everyone hit the like button. Lowkey was having some technical difficulties. He may be joining us at some point during this live stream. But without further ado, we are going to get started. So hit that like button. That helps boost things. Okay, gentlemen, we have a lot to get to. So first, I wanted to actually play. There has been a lot of talk about this ceasefire. Israel continues to kill Palestinians. Some estimates say upwards of 9. That appears to be a gross undercount since the ceasefire was established. But there is a lot of even conflicting messages being sent out from Donald Trump and Netanyahu after that humiliation ritual that occurred in Egypt and what happened at the Knesset on the same day when the ceasefire was established. Here's Donald Trump's message, a very sensitive, almost angry kind of response to those asking if this war, the genocide in Gaza, is truly over.
Benjamin Netanyahu, the prime minister, has not gone so far as to say the war is over. In your view, is the war between Israel and Hamas over?
The war is over. The war is over. Okay, you understand that?
So that was his response to the situation with regard to the ceasefire, despite the fact that Israel is violating every single part of it as we speak. And Netanyahu had a different answer when he responded to questions on what some are calling the Zionist Broadcast Corporation now, with the Barry Weiss hire as the chief editor. But CBS interviewed Benjamin Netanyahu, asked him about his response to what Trump said with the war being over. Here's what Netanyahu had to say with a smile on his face, as always. Here we go.
Mr. Trump says the war is over, but clearly the war is not over. The IDF is deployed to sections of Gaza still, and Hamas is still on the streets of Gaza. How can you say the war is over?
Well, we agreed to give peace a chance. We agreed that we should. The conditions in his 20-point plan are very clear. It's not only that we get the hostages out without getting our military out, but that we would subsequently have both demilitarization and disarmament. They're not the same thing. First, Hamas has to give up its arms. And second.
So we don't have to go more into that. He won't say the war is over. And many believe that it is not, especially since Israel keeps on killing Palestinians. This seems to be a really big slap in Trump's face, but this has been kind of a pattern that's been happening throughout this period since Trump has come into office. There's been almost like this hand-wringing, this boasting by Trump, and then Israel does the exact opposite of what he supposedly has put on the paper. Professor Marandi, how about your first reaction to all of this?
Obviously, there's not going to be peace, and this ceasefire at some point is going to fall apart. I don't know when, whether in days or weeks or months, or I have no idea. But this is not going to get into the second phase, because the resistance is not going to give up its arms, because we know that if they do, they're going to be massacred. And the people of Palestine will never forgive them, because they're the only protection that the people have. What Trump did, and he's very impulsive. I don't know what goes on in the mind of Trump, thank God. But if we do know that he's very impulsive, but the fact that he said this will make it more costly for the Israeli regime to relaunch the war. Even though I think that if they want to do it, they'll still do it. It's not as if that Trump's words are going to stop Netanyahu, but it will make it more costly. And I think that it will, because it will humiliate Trump. And Trump, he likes humiliating others, not Israelis, but we saw in occupied Palestine how he humiliated Adelson, how in Egypt he humiliated everyone. But if the Israeli regime relaunches the war, then this genocide, then it's not going to look good for him because he said it is over, and he stressed that it is over. Of course, the regime is going to continue killing people. They've, as you said, they killed 8 or 9 already, and that's what they do in Lebanon. In Lebanon, every day they're carrying out attacks. They bomb people who are working to rebuild their homes. They bomb people who are working in the field. They bomb people on motorcycles. They bomb people who are driving with vegetables in their van to sell. And they just a couple of weeks ago, they murdered a Lebanese American family, 3 kids in that family, as well as the father. The 3 children were born in the United States, but no one in the United States cared. No one in power. The U.S. Embassy didn't do anything. Western journalists didn't make a big fuss over it. So there's no reason to think that the Israeli regime, if they do carry out attacks, that there will be any major response coming from the West. However, it will not be good for the regime because the global campaign and the global hostility that now exists towards the Israeli regime will be reinforced every time they carry out a murder, because none of us are going to let them get away with it. There are now tens of millions of activists across the world who are watching what's going on in Gaza. They're watching what's going on in Palestine. They're watching what's going on across the region. So every time someone is killed, every time someone is injured, Western media is not going to do anything about it. They're silent about Lebanon. They don't say anything about the attacks that we just see every single day. But there are many people who are doing that. And if things, if the Israelis start killing people in Gaza, which they've already done, this is not, it's just going to keep reminding people about the genocide. Every time there's another murder, whether in the West Bank or in Gaza or in Lebanon, people are going to be reminded about 2 years of Holocaust.
Yeah, and Ali, what Professor Marandi said there too reminded me of how even though you had Trump, he's attempting to humiliate everybody, some very willingly, like UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer during this circus show during the Egypt summit. Now it seems that every time that Trump tries to get this kind of reprieve for himself, Israel, whether Trump gives the green light or not, Israel just keeps going. And that in and of itself is a kind of humiliation, even if Trump doesn't even see it that way, whether because he's just that sociopathic and narcissistic. But what's your reaction? Because you actually shared a piece just now saying that this genocide and what's going on now is kind of always in the cards. It might explain why the resistance has been so steadfast, even now, for example, in refusing disarmament. What's your take?
Yeah, I definitely want to talk about some of that context in a bit, but just to deal with the more immediate aspect of what has happened in the last few days is that clearly Donald Trump wanted this ceasefire, as he wanted the ceasefire in January, which lasted until March, of course, with the usual Israeli violations and so on. The question is, will there be follow through? Really, the only guarantee that this ceasefire will continue, and as you noted, it's already being violated in so many ways. Nonetheless, it's not a small thing that for the vast majority of people in Gaza, the day and night bombardment, the massacres of more than 100 people a day, that has stopped for now. And they desperately wanted that. People in Gaza wanted that, and the resistance was responding to that. So that's important to acknowledge, even if we'll talk about the ongoing violations. But my bigger point is that Trump wanted this ceasefire, and he imposed it. He didn't impose it out of the goodness of his heart. He imposed it because it's very clear, even to Israel's biggest fans and sponsors, that Israel has been incapable of doing the things it said it set out to do and wanted to do. we just saw Netanyahu there talking about Trump's 20-point plan, which includes demilitarization and disarmament. I agree with Dr. Marandi. That's not going to happen anytime soon. But why does Netanyahu need that to come from a so-called peace plan from Trump? He said that the Israeli military would do it. 2 years later, they haven't managed to disarm Hamas or the other resistance factions. They have not managed to dismantle the extensive network of resistance tunnels under Gaza. As we see week after week in the videos released by the resistance is still capable of destroying Israeli tanks and armored vehicles and killing Israeli troops in sophisticated ambushes, that there is really no part of Gaza in which the Israeli army could feel safe without the resistance coming after them. Of course, Israel is vastly more powerful, but the resistance is waging a guerrilla war, and they don't face them, army to army on a front line like in a classical war. They are resistance who harass the invaders, who make it very costly for them to stay. And the resistance in Gaza is still completely capable of doing that, and was doing it up to the last day before this ceasefire. Now, in terms of Israel's other goals that they claimed that they were going to achieve, they were going to get their so-called hostages, actually prisoners of war. These are all occupation soldiers who were released, participants in decades of apartheid, occupation, and genocide. He said they were going to get them out through war. They couldn't get any of them out. I think through the last 2 years, they rescued a couple at very high cost, but they killed far more of their own people in Gaza through bombardment, through starvation, and so on. Well, they could only get them out through negotiations. And negotiations with who? Negotiations with Hamas, the group that Israel said they would completely destroy and eradicate. So here we are, after 2 years of genocide. Hamas is still there, and Israel has to negotiate with it. The resistance is still there. They still have their weapons. And Israel couldn't make any significant political achievement despite carrying out a Holocaust in front of the world. And you think about the undeclared goals Israel had, or let's say the unofficially declared goals, because they were declared not necessarily by Netanyahu, but by Smotrich and Ben Gvir and all those types of fanatical characters who he relies on for support. They wanted to ethnically cleanse Gaza, to forcibly expel the population, and to resettle it, to rebuild these fanatical Jewish colonies inside Gaza. And they have completely failed to do that. The people in Gaza refused to leave. And we all saw, as we did in January, we just saw again in the last few days, the moment people in Gaza had the opportunity, they flooded back to the north. They flooded back to Gaza City, to their homes, albeit absolutely destroyed and devastated by this genocidal regime. But their tenacity and their determination to stay on the land could not be defeated by Israel, despite the suffering Israel inflicted and is still inflicting by refusing to honor its commitment to allow at least 600 trucks of aid into Gaza every day. And on the aid, this is just a marker of how far things have fallen from where they're supposed to be in terms of international law. Humanitarian aid, food, water, electricity should never be a bargaining chip. All of that is unconditional under international law. An occupying power doesn't have the right to starve a civilian population in order to achieve its political or military goals. An occupied people is never meant to have to negotiate about baby food and medicine. This is the most depraved violations of international law, but it's become so normalized with Israel that Israel is allowed to negotiate over how many truckloads of baby formula and basic foodstuffs will come into Gaza to achieve, we're going to starve babies because we couldn't win on the battlefield what we said we would win. And that depravity is built into this so-called agreement which Israel is violating. I'll stop there, Danny, but I do want to come back to some of that historical context you talked about.
Sure. Yeah.
And before you continue, I just want to point out that until now, the Israeli regime was starving people, and they were starving children. They prevented the flotilla from bringing in infant formula. They prevented trucks from bringing in infant formula. But they claimed that it was because of Hamas or because of the fighting. And now that there's no fighting, now that it's easy to get the trucks in, there's no excuse. They won't let the trucks go in. And it just shows that food is a weapon for these monsters. Food is a weapon for these criminals.
And they haven't given up their fundamental goal. I mean, it was, of course, absurd for Trump to talk about this as a peace summit or that he's solved 3,000 years of conflict. Of course, all of that.
3,000 years. What is even anyway? Yeah, I can't even speak it when he says that.
But nothing has been solved. Absolutely nothing has been solved. And as Dr. Marandi said, it's difficult to see how this even gets to the second stage of this so-called Trump plan, because the resistance is not going to hand over its weapons and surrender. Why should they surrender under an agreement what Israel couldn't win on the battlefield, or on the genocide field more accurately? I don't see how we're going to get there, but maybe you're going to ask about this, Danny, but Trump has an element of realism in the sense that he recognized that Hamas is the only force that is capable of maintaining and restoring law and order in Gaza and cleaning up these criminal collaborator gangs hired by Israel, made up of criminals and other elements that they deliberately unleashed during the genocide to steal aid and sow chaos and engage in black market profiteering. Hamas went in immediately and cleaned all that up, got rid of Israel's collaborators, got rid of Israel's thugs. And Donald Trump actually praised Hamas for doing that. And he said, oh, well, we allowed them to keep their weapons for now, but they're going to disarm, or we'll do it violently. Well, that's empty words, because Israel tried for 2 years to do it. And if Israel couldn't do it, how is Donald Trump going to do it? Is he going to send in the Marines to Gaza? I don't think that's even remotely a possibility, but suppose he were to do so. Are they going to do better than the Israeli army? I don't see that happening. So there is a reality that they have been forced to confront despite the rhetoric. And that reality is that the resistance is still there. It's undefeated. The governance structures in Gaza that they promised to destroy reemerged immediately. The Interior Ministry was immediately able to start putting police on the streets, restoring order, restoring some sense of civil life. The Gaza municipality, despite the desperate lack of resources and the fact that Israel, again in violation of this agreement, just like it violated the agreement in January, has not allowed heavy equipment into Gaza to start removing rubble and repairing basic infrastructure. But the Gaza municipality is working, as the municipalities are in other parts of Gaza. So they achieved nothing except a genocide, if you call that an achievement.
Yeah,
that is an achievement. I just Danny, sorry again for interrupting, but I just, as a footnote, I wanted to remind your viewers that the Israeli regime blocked aid for a very long period of time. They prevented anything from getting in, and from day one, they said that they're going to block food. And I mean, if you look at the South African letter to the ICJ, its complaint to the ICJ, the statements of the regime leaders were very clear about their intention for genocide and to starve people, and it's online for people to see. But when they did allow limited food to get it, what they would do was that they would bomb those who were protecting the food. They were protecting the trucks so that they could get to the people. They bombed them, and then these collaborators, they would move in and attack the trucks, steal the goods, and then the Israeli regime, I mean, this is like the most sinister regime in human history. And then the regime would say Hamas is stealing the aid. That's how it worked. So either they would block the food from getting in, and the West never complained about it. They would block, as I said, the flotilla, the trucks. When they did, this was the sinister way in which they reacted. But now they're just exposing themselves again by limiting the food that goes inside Gaza. Now there's a ceasefire, so the trucks should be able to move in. But they're saying, no, we didn't get this body on time, or this body was given to us by mistake. They're just using these as excuses so they could harm people, so that they could starve kids, so they could stunt their growth. These are these are monsters, and they are utterly depraved.
Yeah, and I wanted to actually, as Ali was talking, and perhaps Professor Marandi, you can react to this too. He was talking about how the the Trump administration, Donald Trump himself, admitted that Hamas was really necessary to keep order following this ceasefire, given all that has happened to Palestinians. But then he had this desperate statement that Ali also mentioned. I wanted to play because I want people to hear the inflection of it, because I believe that oftentimes what happens for Donald Trump is that there's an untenable situation that the U.S. or he can't so-called control, but really the reasons for that are not necessarily out of a desire for wanting to control it, so to speak. But then he starts saying things both in content and in form that expose kind of the dead-end character nature of where the U.S. and Israel both find themselves when it comes to the situation in Gaza. Here we go.
We have told them we want to disarm, and they will disarm. And if they don't disarm, we will disarm them. And it'll happen quickly and perhaps violently.
I wanted to just, Professor Marandi, react to that statement by Donald Trump, given all that Ali said, because it does speak to almost a desperation. We just had 2 years of Israel attempting to forcibly, through genocidal violence, to disarm Hamas and the resistance as a whole, and it didn't happen.
Well, again, Trump is impulsive. It's really difficult to take him seriously or anything that he says at face value. If you recall, during the 12-day war with Iran, he said that Iran must surrender and have unconditional surrender. And then he said we may kill the leader. And then he told the people of Tehran to leave the city. Every day he was saying some sort of nonsense and threatening to commit some sort of crime against humanity, which it was doing. I mean, but the point is that a lot of the things that he says, he can't carry out, and the same is true in Gaza. So he says a lot of things, and then he backs down. Even in the trade war, we saw on Liberation Day, he put those tariffs in, and then he had to back down against China when the bond market went into dangerous territory. Nothing that Trump says is really, you cannot count on anything that he says. He may say the complete opposite the next day. But I just wanted to touch upon what happened when he went to Palestine and when he went to the Knesset and then when he went to Egypt. And that is that his remarks, his speech, since he says things that that he doesn't think about carefully, I think it went very bad for him. I think it went very bad for the United States. He admitted basically that his foreign policy is dictated to him by Zionists, by the Edelson family, and that the Golan Heights, the Syrian Golan Heights, that they were given as a gift to the regime by Trump because of them, and of course moving the capital of the regime to Al-Quds or to Jerusalem. All of that was so. He's definitely not American first, and she is definitely not American first either, because he admitted that her love for the Israeli regime, for this genocidal regime, is greater than any feelings that she has for the United States. These sort of things didn't go down well at all. Or, for example, he boasted or laughed about how Netanyahu was seeking all sorts of weapons and the United States gave him whatever he wanted. So he's basically staking claim for the genocide. He's saying, yeah, we were in this together. He's just admitting that he's genocidal. Or the humiliation that we saw in Cairo. All of those leaders who went to Cairo, they betrayed the Palestinian people. They humiliated themselves, and they basically they were whitewashing Trump. But what did Trump do? Was he thankful to them? No, he one by one. I mean, we've seen the different clips go viral. People would watch them here in Tehran and show them to each other and laugh about how he treated the British prime minister and then the Egyptian president and so on and so forth. So Trump, the more Trump talks, the worse it is for the United States. And I think that this whole trip to the region was devastating for the United States. And this just shows that the United States is a declining empire. Its leadership is reflective of that decline. In the past, you had people like Obama, no better than Trump, the same genocidal monster. I mean, Obama, under his leadership, the genocide in Yemen was carried out. Under his leadership, the dirty war in Syria was initiated. Under his leadership, the destruction of Libya took place. I mean, he's no better than Trump. However, he was much smarter. He was much more capable in hypocrisy and in deceiving at least large segments of global public opinion. So I think Trump is very much reflective of the current state of affairs in the United States, a regime that is waging economic war against China, failing, waging military war against Ukraine, failing, carrying out a Holocaust in Gaza, and failing. What happened in Gaza is a major achievement, even though before the show, Ali was saying that people in Gaza have suffered enormously. We should be very careful about talking about victory and that sort of thing, because obviously so many people are grieving and so many families have been destroyed and massacred and exterminated by the regime. But this is a defeat for the Israeli regime, and this is a defeat for the United States, not just because of the fact that the whole peace plan, this fake peace plan, is a sign of the Israeli defeat. Because if Netanyahu was going to win, then Trump wouldn't have felt the need to bring this peace plan forward, this fake peace plan. It's because he failed. And I think it's because the United States sees that the world has turned against it. Its own people have turned against the political regime in Washington. Across Europe is the same. You saw during the last days when the flotilla was moving towards Gaza, the whole Mediterranean region was in uproar. We saw huge demonstrations in Spain. We saw huge gatherings in Italy. Things were changing very rapidly, and it was going downhill for the regime literally after a few weeks. I mean, first few weeks they had the upper hand in propaganda because they lied about rapes, they lied about beheadings, they lied about infants being put in ovens or whatever. They lied knowingly. The Western media lied with them. The Western leaders lied. They all lied in order to enable the genocide. So all of those criminals in Western media who repeated these lies, they have blood on their hands. They have the blood of hundreds of thousands of people on their hands. Every single one of them, because they knew they were lying. I remember I was on Piers Morgan's show and he talked about this, and I said, "Well, where's the evidence?" And he had no evidence. But even afterwards, he kept repeating this. They're all a part of this genocide. But after a while, people began to wake up. People across the world, as the genocide continued, people began to learn about the history of Palestine, about the creation of this Israeli regime. It's not been 3,000 years. It's not 300 years. It's 3/4 of a century since this genocide and this ethnic cleansing had catastrophic proportions. So, but people began to learn, sort of like Vietnam. In the 1960s, Americans supported the war in Vietnam. And then during the 60s, young people began to read about Ho Chi Minh and about the Vietnamese, and they began to recognize that the story that they were being told in the media and by the regime in Washington was not the story, was not the truth. And so people began to become increasingly anti-war. This is, I think, similar, but in a much bigger way. So I think that what's happening in Gaza is a catastrophic defeat for the Israeli regime. It's a catastrophic defeat for the collective West, because the West can never again pretend that it cares about human rights. Never again can the Western media speak about freedom of speech. Never again can they speak about civilization and being the civilized world or the free world. No, they are the most guilty, these regimes. The good thing is that people in the West have shown that they are completely separate from the regimes. They are with the people of Palestine. They are with the people across the global South. And as I said, we saw those in the protests. So I personally consider all of this to be a catastrophic defeat for Trump. I think the language that Trump uses, the things that he says, whether it's on the plane, whether it's in Palestine, occupied Palestine, or in Egypt, I think all of that ultimately works against the United States. But I don't take anything that Trump says seriously, because he will write something on Truth Social, and then the next day he'll, just like about China, he wrote this really nasty piece about the Chinese and President Xi, and then the next day or a day or two later, he retreated just a few hours ago or yesterday or so, and then he said President Xi had a bad moment, but everything is going to be fine 2-3 days ago. But the reality is that he's the one who had a bad moment. He wrote nonsense. He was angry, I suppose, wrote something foolish, and then he had to, when the markets, he sort of carried out an airstrike on the U.S. stock market. And then when things went bad, he tried to take it back. Mm-hmm. So I don't take anything that he says seriously.
Ali, before I get to my question to you, I just want to try to fix, everyone bear with me. I want to try to fix my screen here because, all right, I think that'll be good enough. For some reason, this is as best as Google Meet has a mind of its own, everybody. So bear with us. This is how we get Professor Marandi on the show.
Because we're using Google Meet because of me, because I have some problems with Zoom. It slows down my connection. So it's my fault.
No. We want you here, and that's it is a sacrifice that is not really a sacrifice at all. So appreciate everyone for bearing with us here around some of these technical issues. All right, but Ali, I wanted to get to you because I wanted to talk about, there was a curious op-ed in the New York Times and in the Western media. Oftentimes, the opinion pieces are actually their most truthful reporting in terms of what they're actually thinking. And so Bret Stephens, who is a long-time neocon columnist for the New York Times, wrote "Why Israel Won the War," and it's a total soliloquy to essentially saying that everyone was killed. Yahya Sinwar was killed. The resistance was neutered, and he says here, Yahya Sinwar and those who followed him thought that it should settle these questions. Are Israelis weak? Is their state built on foundations of sand? Is their attachments to their beliefs slight? And then it makes a horrific conclusion. The grave he made for himself should settle those questions for good. I mean, this is how these people think. But what's so interesting about this, Ali, is that the resistance has kept going and going and going throughout this whole genocide. And Yahya Sinwar did say outright that one of the biggest goals of the resistance before October 7, 2023 was to launch a possible operation that would do this, which Professor Marandi cites all of the time. How do Americans view Israel Hamas conflict? How do they view the genocide in Gaza 2 years into it? Well, now 59% hold an unfavorable opinion. This is Americans. This is really what Israel and the United States care the most about. Now hold an unfavorable opinion of the Israeli government, up from 51% in just a year. So, some have said to me, Ali, why did the resistance keep going? Why did they do it at all? And I know that you have some context to share too in response to that question, historically, as to perhaps this was something that was coming anyway, and it was a sacrifice that the resistance was going to make in order to achieve its own goals, which you can elucidate to as well. So, Ali, to you.
Well, if you think about, as Dr. Marandi pointed out, in the first few weeks after October 7th, and to this day, all the Western governments, all of their media, which are very loyal to the Western governments, they have very, they don't need to threaten the media because the media is so loyal and so subservient that they act like state media without being told. They all spread the lies about October 7th, the rapes, the beheaded babies, all of this atrocity propaganda. I think if you went back to those first weeks, they would have felt very confident that the world is on their side and going to stay on their side because of the effort to portray what happened on October 7th as this horrific, monstrous terrorist attack instead of what it was, which was a carefully planned resistance operation, primarily targeting and effectively destroying the Israeli military southern division. For us to be in a situation now 2 years later where Israel is hated to the extent that it is all around the world, but particularly in the United States, those numbers you showed, and there are other polls that have come out. They keep coming out, Danny. There was one just a week or so ago in the Washington Post that something like 60% of American Jews believe Israel is committing war crimes, and 40% of American Jews believe Israel is committing genocide. Now, that's significant because even the supposedly Jewish base for Israel is disappearing. And when you break those numbers down by age and so on, you find that the younger generations are overwhelmingly against Israel. And that this turn against Israel is not just on the traditional liberal left, but on the right as well, where we've seen major figures on the right who are very pro-Trump. Tucker Carlson, Marjorie Taylor Greene, Candace Owens, and many others coming out strongly against. Sorry?
Bannon, even in his own way.
Oh, yeah.
Steve Bannon in his own way with respect to Iran, the war against Iran, and others who have been sort of making it acceptable to criticize Israel and to criticize Israeli influence over the United States, influence which Donald Trump openly admitted in the Knesset when he said that, Miriam and Sheldon Adelson would march into the White House anytime they wanted and say, we want this, we want that. And you know what? They'd get it. Donald Trump, America First Donald Trump would do it because, Miriam Adelson has $60 billion in her bank account, and she was his biggest donor and the biggest donor to the Republican Party. So all of this is being laid bare now. So what did Israel achieve other than mass murdering people? It's It's hated all over the world. Its friends are embarrassed to be seen with it. Even the EU, which adores Israel. I mean, the EU love affair with Israel is a love story like no other. Even they are ashamed to be seen with Israeli officials. And that speech Netanyahu gave before the UN General Assembly, it was unprecedented to see almost every delegation, except a tiny handful, walking out. That, any other country would be hated. And then the so-called peace summit at Sharm el-Sheikh, who could they get there? It was a collection of Arab vassals and European vassals of the United States. No self-respecting country was there. Iran wasn't there. I don't think China or Russia were there, but correct me if I'm wrong about that. It was the poodles and vassals and the remnants of the American empire hanging on to the coattails of their master and being eager to be the best student in the classroom. And when Donald Trump said, where's the UK? Obama jumps forward, Emmanuel Macron jumps forward, everyone does what they're told, everyone is humiliated. The UAE, which sees itself as this major global player, for Trump, he reduced them to what they are to him, which is a lot of cash. That's what he said. They got a lot of money. So that's it to them. Anyway, a bigger question that you were pointing to, Danny, is one of the strains of thought we particularly see this among Arab Zionists, but also we see it among people in the West, which is to blame the resistance for the genocide and to say, oh well, if they hadn't launched October 7th, Gaza would still be...
too soon, not the right time, not the right strategy, whatever. But continue.
The first thing we have to say as a matter of principle is that victims of genocide are never responsible for the genocide. Jews did not force the Nazis to carry out the Holocaust, not just the Nazis, but all the European governments who collaborated with the Nazis. That wasn't the fault of Jews. They didn't have it coming to them. That's not, Africans were not enslaved and carried in ships across the Atlantic because they had it coming to them. Millions of people were not mass murdered in Vietnam and Cambodia and Laos by the United States because they had it coming to them, or because they didn't obey the imperial orders of the French or the Americans after them. The Mau Mau and the people of Kenya who were tortured and murdered and brutalized by the British, they didn't have that coming to them. And the Palestinians did not have this genocide coming to them because of the resistance operation on October 7th. And even if the resistance operation of October 7th was all the things Israel's fabricated propaganda says it was, of course, that still doesn't justify genocide, because there is no justification and no mitigation for genocide in international law. It is the crime of crimes, and there's no excuse for it. Now, having said that, you still get these tactical quibbles and say, oh, well, they shouldn't have done it. They were overpowered. They would never. When would the resistance ever have enough power to confront not just Israel, but the United States and the whole West? The whole of Western barbarism was lined up behind Israel, not Western civilization. I don't call it that. Western barbarism was lined up before Israel. And we know that before October 7th, the ethnic cleansing was accelerating in the West Bank as it is now. The siege of Gaza was just as intense. We have seen Israeli massacre after massacre since the 2005 so-called redeployment, when Israel moved its settlers out of Gaza and started imposing this suffocating siege. Every 2 years, it was becoming more frequent. Israel would carry out these massacres, the so-called mowing the lawn. Yeah. Where was this leading? It was leading to genocide, whether or not October 7th took place. And the evidence I want to offer for that, Danny, is
Oh, sorry. Hold on one second. I accidentally stopped sharing our screen here. Where is it? Here we are.
Um,
Here we
there's
are.
a quote
Sorry. Just continue with the piece of evidence. Sorry, the Google
Yeah,
Meet.
that's
I
okay.
keep
It's
on.
fine if you
Yeah.
it's fine if you can't show it. But what I wanted to refer people to is this interview given by an Israeli government advisor called Arnon Sofer in 2004, 21st of May 2004, in the Jerusalem Post, in an article called "It's the Demography Stupid." Now, this was too embarrassing, so the Jerusalem Post removed it, but there are archived copies of it, and so that's why I'm giving you the headline and the date. Now, Arnon Sofer, who is a demographer at the University of Haifa, and he was an advisor to Ariel Sharon, the Israeli prime minister, who carried out the so-called redeployment from Gaza in 2005. And he explained the logic. At that time in 2005, I know a lot of your viewers won't remember this, but I remember it very well. I know Dr. Marandi will too. The way that the Western media sold the Israeli withdrawal of its settlers from Gaza was, oh, this is a step for peace. No. Arnon Sofer explained what it was for. He said that unilateral separation, that's what the Israelis called it, doesn't guarantee peace. It guarantees a Jewish Zionist state with an overwhelming majority of Jews. And why is that? Because Israel's problem is that Palestinians outnumber Jews from the river to the sea, and they need to cull the Palestinian population, or at least cage it in concentration camps. And that was the explicit government strategy. If you leave it there, Danny, I'll read that bit.
Sure.
Sofer said, the day after unilateral separation, the Palestinians will bombard us with artillery fire and we will have to retaliate. But at least the war will be at the fence, not in the kindergartens of Tel Aviv and Haifa. Sofer said, we will tell the Palestinians that if a single missile is fired over the fence, we will fire 10 in response, and women and children will be killed and houses will be destroyed. Further down the line, he was saying years ahead. He didn't specify 10 years or 20 years, but now we know the date. It's 2023 to 2025. When 2.5 million people live in a closed-off Gaza, it's going to be a human catastrophe. Those people will be even bigger animals than they are today. With the aid of an insane fundamentalist Islam, the pressure at the border will be awful. It's going to be a terrible war. So if we want to remain alive, we will have to kill and kill and kill all day, every day. That was the vision for the future of Gaza from the Israeli architects of the so-called separation from Gaza. And they were going to carry it out when the moment came, whether it was 10 years ago, right now, 10 years from now. This isn't what it was coming to, because if you believe in a Jewish state and you believe Israel has the right to exist as a Jewish state, as Zionists claim, then it must have a right to cull or expel the surplus non-Jewish population in order to enforce its so-called right to be a Jewish state. So the logic of Zionism is genocide. As long as there is Zionism, genocide will be the inevitable outcome, and that's what we are living through today.
Yeah. And Professor Marandi, this is, even those who are defending this, we had that Brett Stevens article, but of course you have even outlets like Vox News, which is a Israeli apologist, so-called liberal outlet. But it even talks about the bleak lessons that Israel and the world might learn. And in these bleak lessons, this is the one I want to highlight here. It's not hard to imagine a new armed resistance movement emerging and carrying out future attacks on Israel. That's assuming, of course, that Hamas has been defeated. But even that admission that more resistance is coming, I think, is a pretty big sign of failure. Your thoughts?
Well, what happened during the last 2 years is often described in the West as in mainstream media or among Western officials and think tankers as an achievement of the Israeli regime. It's a win of sorts. But I think it's been a catastrophic defeat for them throughout. They have failed on all battlefields. They have not been able to defeat Hamas or its allies, Islamic Jihad. They've not been able to defeat Hezbollah. They've not been able to defeat Ansarullah. They've not been able to defeat Iran. In fact, in the case of Iran, they lost. But they've been weakened severely. I mean, the economy aside, their casualties aside, their image across the world has been destroyed, as we've been discussing earlier. This is the greatest defeat of all. And especially, as Ali pointed out, in the United States, people despise the regime and their ideology increasingly, especially young people. I think Ali knows this better than I, and you, Danny, living in the United States, but also elsewhere. Whenever we'd have discussions with people, especially in the West, and even outside of the West, it would be difficult to convince them about what the Israeli regime is all about. But now you have many millions of people, many young people, who defend the Palestinians, who expose the Israeli regime far better than than people like me. You have waves of young people and older people who go to the streets.
That's why they had to do a Zionist takeover of TikTok.
Exactly. And I think it's a foolish move. If they had done this a year and a half ago, I think they could have hoped for success. But young people are not stupid. Everyone knows why they're, and they're also showing the West that it's not just that it's not American first when it comes to foreign policy. There's no American first when it comes to politics at home. They've taken away freedom of expression, freedom of speech, freedom to access information, all because of the Israeli regime, all because of Zionism. American university students, American professors, they have to be silent. American high school and teenagers, they cannot access the materials they want on TikTok or elsewhere because of the Zionist regime. And for what reason? Because they want to hide a Holocaust, because they want to hide a genocide. How bad can that be? Again, I've always say that if the Israeli regime had carried out this is not nice to say, but it's a horrible thing to say. But if the Israeli regime had just carried out a couple of months of genocide and slaughtered I'm sure that hundreds of thousands have been martyred, but if they just slaughtered 20, 30,000 people and then accepted a ceasefire and then had a prisoner exchange of sorts, they would have been the winners because they had won the propaganda campaign at the beginning with the lies that they in the Western media were repeating and think tankers were repeating about these fake allegations. But the longer it continued, the more disgusted people became across the world. And now it's too late. It's too late to shut things down. And the more they try to shut things down, the more that they're exposing who they really are. So I think that the American regime, the European regimes with their love. I recall a couple of years ago at the beginning, the European embassies in occupied Palestine, they would put out tweets that were so outrageous. And Ali I think he was on a number of occasions. I think ultimately he was blocked by EU in Jerusalem or EU in Israel or whatever it is, the EU account for Twitter. And it was just outrageous. While children were being massacred, that they were, it was like business as usual in Palestine. They were having dinner parties together and posting about the good times that they're having. And, literally kilometers away, children were being torn to shreds. every single day, morning till night. Then we saw. I mean, if you recall, and again, I digress, but this is something that really bothers me. Do you recall the first time that they struck a hospital? And they went and said, I mean, the world was outraged. And then they had to so they began to blame the resistance. And we saw like Western media repeat what the Israelis said. Then we saw Western intelligence agencies put out statements. The French intelligence said, yes, it was the Palestinians. The British were saying, yes, it's the Palestinians. Everyone was saying it was the Palestinians. But gradually they went after more hospitals. And then they went after all the hospitals. And then they pull out the plug for incubators to let infants die. And then it was the starvation. Then we saw the images of children dying. And what did these people try to do? The same people in Western mainstream media who now try to pretend that the Israelis won. They were saying, yes, these infants who are dying, it's not starvation. These infants had different ailments and different diseases, as if that makes a difference. So it's sort of justifying why these children are starving. It's too late. They've demolished themselves. They've destroyed. The Israeli regime is destroyed. It's a dead regime. It can last for a few more years, but wherever they go, and as I said, every time they violate the ceasefire, every time they kill another Palestinian, every time they strike and kill someone on a motorcycle in Lebanon, there will be people across the world who are going to remind people that this genocidal regime is still killing people. Every time they block a truck with infant formula, people are going to remind the world that this genocidal regime is blocking food. And when the war starts again, the world will be outraged because everyone is breathing a sigh of relief that the slaughter of these infants have come to an end for now, and then had come to an end, and now these monsters are starting again. This is going to be downhill for the Israeli regime. There's no way out of this. All of what they've done are going to go into the history books. You cannot take this back. They cannot take this back. It's over. All of these, right now, what Twitter is doing is when I put out posts with some of these footage of the crimes, they delete my posts now. And I cannot see other posts where they show sensitive material because Twitter is now saying they don't know my age. So, as if, they're doing their best, whether it's TikTok or Twitter or Instagram or Facebook, but all they're doing is they're exposing, or YouTube, all they're doing is that they're exposing the fact that the West is not the free world. It is not the civilized world. It is just making it worse for themselves. And as I said, the more we move forward, the worse it's going to get for the Israeli regime. They will restart the war at some point. They will attack Iran at some point. But whatever they do, they're in quicksand. It's just going to make it worse for themselves.
And if I may, Danny,
Yeah.
I think it's so important to stress that this is not over. Before October 7th, as I talked about, Gaza was under siege. Gaza was being starved slowly. It was being strangled slowly. And it had been at that point for almost 2 decades. And there were, yes, life was better than during a Holocaust, but that's not saying much. It's like live in a reservation, live in a concentration camp, or we'll destroy you all from the air is not a choice. And what Israel wants to go back to, at best, if they can't complete the ethnic cleansing and genocide that they set out to do, they want to go back to a situation where Gaza remains under siege. And remember, where they control everything that goes in and out, everyone who goes in and out, and that life is impossible, reconstruction is impossible. That's what they did after their massacre in 2014. They tried to control and register every single bag of cement that went into Gaza. They banned so many basic goods coming into Gaza, all under the excuse of, oh, well, we don't want Hamas to get their hands on it. Well, none of that stopped Hamas from building a formidable resistance along with the other resistance factions, but it did cause intense suffering. And that's what they want to go back to now. So what I want to caution people is breathe a sigh of relief that the daily massacres have stopped for now, but don't rest for long, because they are going to go back to siege as usual, to blockade as usual, to massacres as usual, as soon as they can. Already, by blocking aid trucks from coming in that they had promised to allow to come in, they're showing that. They're showing there is no shred of good faith here from Israel. And what has made an enormous difference is the global uprising for Palestine and for Gaza, and putting the pressure, shaming these disgusting, complicit European governments, even forcing Donald Trump to take notice that his own base is turning against Israel. So all that protest matters, all of that visibility matters, the boycotting matters, the divestment campaigns matter. It all makes a difference. And this is something that our friends in Gaza have told us consistently and continuously and every single day. We had Dunya Abu Sittah, a young writer from Gaza, who's been writing for the Electronic Intifada throughout this genocide. She came on our live stream last Thursday, and she said it again, that she said, thank you to everyone around the world. Go to our YouTube channel and watch her interview. It's remarkable. She said, I want to tell people around the world, we see you, we hear you. That's what gives people in Gaza the strength and the hope to continue. So I really want to urge people, don't let up, keep up the pressure, because this is not over. Nothing has been fixed. Nothing has been solved. It is just a truce, and Israel is showing no sign that it is willing to let Palestinians live freely on their own land. That's the one thing. All of these peace processes, all these summits, all of these complicated mechanisms, all of this stuff they invent is all an alternative to the one thing that the United States and Israel and their vassals absolutely reject, and that is to let the Palestinian people live free. That's the one thing they won't consider as a solution to this so-called problem, to this so-called, as Donald Trump falsely claims, 3,000-year conflict. Let the Palestinians live free. Instead of letting the Palestinians go free, they want to impose a new form of colonial mandate on them, with of all people ruling over them, Tony Blair. I mean, imagine anything more reprehensible and revolting and disgusting than that. It's so in your face what they're trying to do, that you Palestinians, you will never be free. If you don't live under Israel's boot, you'll live under the boot of Tony Blair. You'll live under the boot of Arab collaborators. You'll live under the boot of hand-picked Palestinians that we pick, who we think will collaborate with us against you. But the one thing we will never allow or contemplate is for you to be free like other people on this earth, for you to be sovereign, for you to live in peace on your own land. We will never allow that. And Palestinians will never accept that. They will never accept subjugation. After everything they did to the people in Gaza, they are unbowed. Yes, they are exhausted. Yes, they are bleeding. Yes, they are tired. Yes, they are grieving. Yes, they are utterly traumatized. Yes, they are saying, we needed it to stop and we wanted it to stop. But what none of them are saying is we surrender.
Yeah. Oh, that's
the only thing more disgusting than Blair would have been for Trump to put Dick Cheney in charge.
right.
It is the most insulting and disgusting thing possible. But I wanted to build on something that Ali said earlier, and that is October the 7th. Because now a lot of people in the West are they're lying about October the 7th, and they're saying that this is a mistake, and then some people, it's some people in our region or in Iran or the Palestinians or others are saying that this was a mistake. No, no one is saying that. If it did not happen on October the 7th, and they did it on October the 8th or October the 20th or in 2024 or 25, would it have been any different? Would there have been no genocide? So what do the Palestinians do? Is that what the Algerians did? Should they have just sat there and said, okay, well, they're going to murder 1 million, 2 million Algerians, so we should just sit down and accept French colonialism? Is that what the people in Rhodesia or Zimbabwe or Southern Africa should have done? Is that what the people in the subcontinent should have done? Is that what people across Africa and Latin America and across Asia should have done? If they'd done that, then we would be living in the same empire that they were living in 100 years ago. Nothing would change. So the resistance in Palestine, they have no option. If they had not carried out an operation against the Israeli regime, you would have had regional regimes integrate with this demonic regime even further.
Right.
They would have been more openly complicit. Every time I'd go through Istanbul airport, you'd see like these flights from Palestine full of these Zionists. I went to Qatar once. I was invited by Al Jazeera, and Shimon Peres was there. That was then. They were normalizing faster and faster. So what would have happened? There would have been normalization with the whole Arabian Peninsula. Erdogan had normalized a long time ago. Aliyev sending his oil. Egypt purchasing gas. It was just going to get worse by the day. The Israelis would steal whatever gas there is in the Mediterranean. Time was not on the side of the Palestinian people. I know you invited Alistair Crook on your show once.
Mm-hmm.
Once Alistair, he told me that he went to Palestine, and these Israeli regime officials, you should ask him about this to get it so that it's more precise. But he went on some sort of tour of the West Bank. This was years ago. And the Israeli regime had planted these extremists in the West Bank back then. He saw how fanatical they were. This was a long time ago, maybe 20 years ago, 15, 20 years ago. And they said, they were basically telling him, look, we put these people here and they're never leaving. The intention was ethnic cleansing from the beginning. The two-state solution was fake from day one. All of these Western regimes knew that there was never any plan for a real two-state solution. They were buying time for the regime. And the regime was planting these colonizers, these fanatics, these crazy people, so that no one could remove them. Even the Israeli regime, if it wanted to, they could not remove them. So what were the Palestinians supposed to do? Sit back and wait for them to continue mowing the lawn? Ultimately, what happened in Gaza would have happened. And they will continue this genocide. But the important thing is that the world has woken up. And the axis of resistance and the broader resistance, they're not going to go away. So the Israeli regime is no longer able to rule supreme militarily or in the propaganda war. In fact, I think they have become utterly foolish and stupid in their propaganda. When I was young, they were pretty good. Their Hasbara and their propaganda was pretty effective. They were lying, but now it's like they're behaving like desperate people. How when someone is desperate, their decisions and their actions are not reasonable and logic. Even within their sinister worldview, there's a certain logic. But now it's as if they in their, within that sinister space of theirs, they have no reason and logic. Even the propaganda that they produce, it's sort of like, it's like if it was an anti-Zionist, or it's as if some anti-Zionist organization was producing this material. Again, as I said earlier, it's all downhill for the regime. We're going to have dark days ahead. We're going to have dark months ahead. There are going to be perhaps dark years ahead. Resistance movements and liberation movements, they don't achieve victory overnight. That's not what happened across Africa. That's not what happened in Latin America. That's not what happened across Asia. They didn't get their liberation through, like, I don't know, it wasn't as if Nelson Mandela, he came out and suddenly they were enlightened. The regime in South Africa was collapsing. And by the way, Desmond Tutu, Archbishop Desmond Tutu, when he traveled to Palestine, and this is way before this Holocaust, he said that the situation in Palestine is far worse than anything he had ever seen in apartheid South Africa. But in any case, back then in South Africa, it wasn't as if suddenly the government decided that enough was enough and we should give these people freedom. No, it was because the regime could not continue, because the regime was falling apart, because the world had turned against it. And the same thing is happening in Palestine. The only difference is that Zionism has powerful roots across the Western political establishment. But the West itself is falling apart. They no longer have that hegemony that they had over the world. This is not the 1990s. This is not even 2020. They wage economic war on China, they have to back down. They wage a military war against Russia, they have to back down. They wage a war against Iran, they have to back down. The world is changing and it will continue to change because the West in its arrogance is picking a fight against everyone. And when you fight everyone, you lose against everyone. And the weaker the West becomes, the weaker the Israeli regime becomes, because the Israeli regime is a puny, weak, and utterly dependent regime. Who does it depend on? It depends on the United States and Western regimes. Europe is declining. The United States is declining. People inside the United States and Europe are waking up. This is all bad news for the regime. So the resistance against the Israeli regime is global. The future is not good, but it's going to be painful days ahead. But those who try to blame the victim, they are shameless. And people shouldn't be fooled by that narrative. That narrative is coming from these Western centers of power. They're lying, but they're trying to eat away at this coalition. They're trying to raise questions among those who are supporting Palestinian children. The resistance has every right to resist. And if it did not happen on October the 7th, whenever they wanted to do it, the same results they would have seen the same result. A genocidal regime would have come out to slaughter them, as Ali showed in that article. And if possible, if you could put a link to that article, so that later on people can go and look and use that in their presentations in whatever country they are, because I think that's a key article showing that these people were genocidal not in 2023. They've been genocidal since the very beginning.
Yeah, and I have it in the video description now. And Ali, you had published that about 11 years ago, somewhere between 10 and 11 years ago. So that's
and
what
what I said is that what I said then and what I say now is this will keep happening because the fundamental problem is that Israel is a racist colony that believes it has a right to have an ethno-supremacist majority over the indigenous Muslim and Christian people of Palestine. And that won't work. It didn't work in South Africa. It didn't work in Ireland. The only places where these ethno-settler colonies managed to consolidate was, like in Canada, the United States, Australia, New Zealand, where they committed a much more total genocide.
When they succeeded.
Well, they succeeded. We always have to be careful not to erase the ongoing indigenous presence and resistance, cultural and other forms of resistance that have never gone away. But they succeeded, yes, in so decimating the population that they couldn't challenge the existence of the entity. The settler colonies that failed, Algeria, Mozambique, Angola, South Africa, Northern Ireland. In those settler colonies, the indigenous population was still a substantial part of the population, if not the majority. And that's the case in Palestine, where now the Palestinian population, if we're to be generous to the Israelis, will say it's 50-50 between the river and the sea. But by
and that's
all
not including
the
that's
refugees.
not including the Palestinians. Yes, exactly.
Exactly. So, we're just talking about within so-called Israel, the West Bank, and Gaza. If we want to be extremely generous and give the Israelis every advantage we can, we'll say it's 50-50. But every credible population analysis, including ones published in recent years from the Israeli army, says that Palestinians are a majority. And look what Israel had to do to murder, well, now by some estimates, I mean, the official death toll, the recorded death toll, is still around 70,000. But everybody knows that that is a vast undercount because so many people are still lying uncounted under the rubble.
And it's not just them, Ali. It's the people who have died because of cancer.
Correct.
No
Heart attacks.
I mean, the numbers are going to come out.
Yeah.
Because there are statistical trends. The way in which a society grows, the number, when ultimately there's going to be a huge gap between the population that Gaza is supposed to have and the population that Gaza actually does have. And
exactly.
I think that when that comes out, then we're going to see the real extent of this Holocaust.
Right, but and I mean, it's horrific to talk about things, and we don't want to minimize it in any way. But suppose the Israelis succeeded, for them it would be a success, in murdering 500,000 people in Gaza. Suppose they succeeded in murdering 500,000 people in Gaza, which is not out of the question. There are already credible estimates that it's several 100,000. It's the deaths from the genocide are continuing because of all the people whose health has been degraded by the starvation, by the deprivation, by the deliberate destruction of the health care system, and so on. So let's say the toll from the genocide reaches 500,000. From Israel's perspective, what did that solve? It maybe bought them a few years in the best case, but what does it buy them in a world where they're hated and despised and people see them from where they are? So genocide is not a solution. I'm talking from the perspective of the colonialist. Genocide is not the solution to your colonial demographic problem that it once was. And Israel won't get away with it. Yes, they will get away with it in the short term, in the sense that we're not seeing international institutions and the UN and the courts stepping up the way they should. But I think Dr. Marandi is right, as this regime has no future. It is so hated. It is so delegitimized. It is so it is now totally exposed for what it is, as are its supporters around the world, that it's hard to see them. They can't ever recover to the situation where they were. And so can they commit a genocide to murder 2 million, 3 million people, 4 million people, 5 million people? Even if they had the means to do so, that doesn't solve their problem. So Israel is finished. This genocide was the last gasp for this murderous regime. They had the fantasy that if we kill enough Palestinians, we reduce the numbers, we get our majority back, but if we kill enough, we get the others to run away. to flee. We scare them into leaving, and we finally get this land without them. That was their
Just like
gamble.
in 1948.
Like
Just like in
1948. And they used far more horrifying methods than in 1948. 1948, which was a horrific ethnic cleansing with mass murder, with rapes, with terrorism carried out by the Zionists. But Israel went much further now than it has ever gone before. And it was the last gasp to hold on to this racist, genocidal settler colony. It will take some time to unravel, but it is over. And it has to be over. This, you know, you have people like Zohran Mamdani even saying Israel has a right to exist. No, it doesn't. No, first of all, no state has a right to exist.
Right.
Peoples have a right to self-determination. And if they decide to express their self-determination in the form of a state, that's their right. If they decide to abolish that state, that's their right. But no state has an abstract right to exist. But I'll tell you this, if any state has a right to exist, the state with the least right to exist, and in fact with no right to exist, is Israel, is this state that carried out the Holocaust. If it had a so-called right to exist, which it never did, it is forfeited. It needs to be wound up and removed from the roster of states at the United Nations and replaced with a demographic state in which the Palestinian people exercise self-determination, and those Jews who agree to forego the racist ideology of Zionism, the genocidal ideology of Zionism, if they agree to forego that, we need a process of de-Zionization. So de-Zionized Israeli Jews who wish to live in peace and equality would be able to do so. I've never seen Palestinians unwilling to consider that. Of course, after committing a genocide, I think it's a lot to ask Palestinians to consider a future side by side with these dangerous neighbors who were so willing to mass murder them. We had on the Electronic Intifada live stream 2 weeks ago, Haim Brashit Jabna, an Israeli-born writer in Britain, brilliant man. I recommend people watch that too. He said this was the most democratic genocide in history, because the Israeli public enthusiastically embraced genocide. We had poll after poll after poll showing more than 80% of the Israeli Jewish public, sometimes 90%, supported this genocide. We're fully on board with it. Yes, of course, there's always a few dissidents and we shouldn't erase them, but this was an overwhelmingly popular genocide. The Israeli public enthusiastically took part in this. So they are not safe for Palestinians to live next to. Palestinians need to be protected from Israel and the Israeli population until they can be defanged, demilitarized, de-Zionized, and brought into the fold of humanity and civilization, which I believe they can. You know, Israeli Jews, the vast majority who supported this genocide, I don't believe in calling any group of human beings animals or putting them beyond the pale of humanity. They are humans, and humans have done this sort of evil in the past. And because they are human, they could be redeemed and brought into the fold of humanity as long as the worst offenders are brought to justice and there is a process of re-education, de-radicalization, and de-Zionization to make them able to live with others, which they can't do now.
Gentlemen, I know we've been going a while.
Can I just add a couple of sentences?
I wanted to cover Iran after. Do you have any time for that, both of you?
I think Ali doesn't have that much time, but I don't know.
If you could
let's take I would love to hear Dr. Marandi talk about Iran, so we could take a few more minutes to do that because I took up a lot of time.
Well, how about Professor Marandi?
Can you add something to what Ali said about
Yeah. Give your additions,
Yeah, I
and
just
then I'll
wanted to
switch
say that
topics. Yep.
I as an individual, I'm particularly grateful to all those young Jews in the United States and Europe who've been standing up for the resistance and for the Palestinian people, because they show that these propagandized people in Palestine, that they are not representing Judaism. Zionism is a cult, and they are the most anti-Jewish people on this planet, because all of they're carrying out all these crimes in the name of Jews. Just as they're not, they're not Semites. They are Europeans. They're from the Palestinians are the Semites, and that is another myth. But they are not doing this on behalf of Jews. Jews, and some of the most exceptional people in the global resistance are Jews, as we know, including in the electronic intifada, including in the Gray Zone, and other shows, Katie Halper, and all the others on economists, in politics, people across the world from different faiths. They're all a part of this resistance. But at the end of the day, this regime cannot be considered legitimate, whether it's within the 1967 borders or within the current borders, because ethno-supremacism is not legitimate. You cannot say that, okay, let's say they give up the West Bank, which they will not do. As I said, I gave the example that Alistair Crook told me himself. This will not be done willingly, nor elsewhere. But let us assume that somehow, magically, they give up the West Bank, which the UN says they have to do. Does that mean that you can have ethno-supremacism within the 1967 borders? Does that mean that you should have a master race, a chosen people within the 1967 borders, and those people who've been ethnically cleansed from their homes, that they have no right to go home, and those who remain there are second-class citizens or subhuman, like in South Africa or elsewhere? It's not legitimate. It's not morally legitimate. And the ideology itself has been shown to be genocidal. So the Israeli regime is not legitimate. They never were legitimate. But what they've done is that they've shown the world who they are. They've exposed themselves to the world.
Yeah, so I wanted to talk about Iran for the last segment. If you have time, Ali, if you have to go, or I want to be respectful to both of your times. So just let me know how you're doing.
I can stay on for another 15 minutes. I'd like to hear Dr. Marandi as well.
Okay. All right. Well, let's get to this then, because throughout all of this, gentlemen, everything that you have analyzed about Israel and its predicament, along with the United States, is still the war drums against Iran continue, but with some interesting caveats, so to speak. So I don't know if you both saw that Netanyahu had a conversation with Vladimir Putin on the eve of the formulation, the cementing of the strategic partnership between Iran and Russia, where he conveyed his disinterest in war. And Putin was said to have then conveyed that message to Iran. Now, a lot of people are saying that this is likely a head fake, because Israel often does this, where they use negotiations or they use intermediaries. They talk about they don't want war. But I wanted, and then they eventually strike and wage war. But I wanted to then pull up, because I want to start with you, Professor Marandi, if possible. The all of the talks about Iran and the resistance, weakening, but there has been a lot of preparations, even the Tel Aviv based media that I know you have understandable ill feelings toward, given that Iran International just absolutely carries water for the Israeli regime. But there's all kinds of talks about Iran rearming, about seeking out. There's been a leak from Black Mirror about Russian weapons, for example, the Su-35 jets, and then now seeking Chinese weapons, air defense systems, even missiles, unmanned aerial vehicles, and drones from China. Talk about how you are seeing both this so-called ceasefire. Some people have intimated it might be a prelude to Israel focusing more on Iran. What do you think about this, and how is Iran and the rest of the resistance getting ready for what many see as a coming attack in the near future.
Well, just as a footnote, Iran International has nothing to do with Iran. It's a CIA Mossad outfit. They're agents of empire. But the important thing, I think, is that President Putin put out this information, and I think he did it for a reason, because he didn't have to go public with it. I think he wanted to make it more costly for the Israeli regime if they did carry out a war, which I think is quite possible that they will launch another attack. And I think Iranians, I know that the Iranians are preparing themselves for that scenario. It's sort of like what Trump did, but Trump did it unwittingly, I think, when he said there's not going to be another war, and he stressed it. He said it, I think twice in that interview, and stressed that there's no more war. Well, if there is war, that is going to look very bad for Trump. If there is war, if they do wage another blitzkrieg attack against Iran, another unprovoked attack, it's going to be an insult to Russia and to President Putin, because it's going to make him look bad. And I think that's why President Putin did that. I think he wanted to put Netanyahu in a difficult position. This is just my personal interpretation. I'm not saying this based on any insider information. The Israeli regime, I mean, one of the things that we're always hearing is how the Israelis are winning and the resistance is losing. And I think we all know that Iran has been losing for what, almost 50 years now? We're always imploding, falling apart. Yeah, we're always falling apart. At least the Western narrative is consistent. We're always losing. It's always a defeat for us. But if Iran is losing, then why didn't the Israeli regime continue the war? Why didn't the Americans continue the war? I mean, if I was winning a war and I consider this enemy to be existential, then I just finished the job. It's obvious. But they didn't, because they couldn't, because they lost. And Steve Bannon, I think at least on two occasions, on two that I've seen, he put, he's very well informed. He said that Trump saved Netanyahu. He saved the Israeli regime because the Israeli regime was being hammered. And during the final days, the Iranians didn't need to fire so many missiles because almost all of them were getting through, because they were learning how Israeli air defenses and American air defenses were working, and almost everything they fired, they hit their targets. And increasingly information is coming out that the Iranian missiles some of them hit very sensitive targets, and the damage was much greater than they were letting on at the beginning. Today, the Iranians are more prepared than before. And another thing, Danny, remember 20 years ago, 23 years ago, when Bush gave his State of the Nation speech to Congress, and he first used the axis of evil term for basically it was for Iran. It was Iraq under Saddam Hussein, their own agent. They gave him chemical weapons to wage war against Iran. Then they turned against him. I don't want to go into that, but your younger viewers should just remember that they gave him chemical weapons. They gave him chemical weapons to use against Iranians and then Iraq and the Iraqis. And then later they invaded the country in the name and destroyed the country in the name of chemical weapons, which they no longer had. But so it was Iran, Iraq, and North Korea. Right? So Iran really was the focus of Western animosity because of Palestine, because Iran was independent, the only real independent country in the region, and probably in some ways the most independent country in the world, but also because of Iran's stance on Palestine. Well, today, the United States can no longer focus on Iran like it did back then, because that was the unipolar moment. That was the height of U.S. power, and Iran was isolated. Now the United States and the West, their energy is focused on Russia. It's focused on China. It's focused even now on India and Brazil and elsewhere. They don't have the power that they had 22, 23 years ago. So they can say that Iran is falling apart all they like. They are in trouble, and the resistance is not going away. These think tankers in the United States, I heard this Sajjadpur person, who talks nonsense a lot, and others, I don't know what he said because I don't follow these people, but they've been talking about how Iran is weak. Well, we've been hearing that for many years. But what I'm seeing is a United States that's deeply divided. What I'm seeing is a United States where the middle class has collapsed. What I'm seeing is a United States where Charlie Kirk, when he's murdered, the narrative,
It's all in Israel.
the FBI narrative is all fake.
Right.
And regardless of who carried out the murder, it's definitely not what they say it is. And the fact that people immediately point fingers at the Israeli regime shows how discredited the political regime in Washington and the Israeli regime are, regardless of who did it. Regardless if you listen to Candace Owens and you're completely convinced or not, that's another issue altogether. You have a country deeply divided, where the armed forces are going into cities, where every time Trump opens his mouth against China, the stock market falls. This is not the United States that was what one Frenchman called at some point the hyperpower. We're not living in that world anymore. So I don't, regardless of what they say in these Western think tanks, they're not winning, they're losing. And they've lost the hearts and minds of the world. Their economies are floundering, especially the Europeans. And they're losing militarily. They're becoming increasingly desperate. This talk of tomahawks and all that, the stupidity of Western regimes and the escalation that they're carrying up, but they're losing. That's the point that I'm trying to make. They are not this empire, this empire that lasted for hundreds of years, which has been targeting the global majority, but also which targets their own people. People in the West are waking up to this. People across the world are waking up to this, and they do not have the power that they had before. So they can say what they want about Iran, the axis of resistance. We're always losing and being defeated. Fine, they can keep saying that. But at the end of the day, if the Israeli regime strikes Iran, they can kill many of us. They can silence many of us. But they're going to lose the war, and they're going to be people better than the likes of myself, who will come out and raise their voices and continue the struggle against the apartheid regime, and this regime will ultimately collapse.
Yeah, and I wanted to just pull this up for final comments. They're really depending on sanctions, the United States in particular, really depending on sanctions. Trump has recently come out and said that Iran will want to come to the table because these sanctions are so devastating. Well, Iran's oil boom, it is being claimed by experts who follow this, that they're ramping up production back to 2024 levels, and China and Russia being major buyers. And now, Ali, I want your comments on this situation, because we even had Donald Trump himself at the Knesset. He said something to this effect. He said that Iran is ready to essentially capitulate. And I know this has bigger implications for the entire resistance, including Palestine, I'd like you to speak on. But just quickly, here's what he said.
Quit funding their militant proxies and finally recognize Israel's right to existence. They have to do that. They have to do that. And to Iran, and as you know, this is not said out of weakness. There's no weakness. But I'm going to say this, that we are ready when you are, and it will be the best decision that Iran has ever made. And it's going to happen. It's going to happen.
Mind you,
Before Ali continues,
sure.
Remember, this is the guy who said in Truth Social, unconditional surrender.
Right.
When the Israeli regime and the Americans were launching their war against Iran, as Iran was negotiating,
right,
he said unconditional surrender.
And it also must be noted too, Ali, that the applause when Trump was in the Knesset talking about Iran in this way, it was much more muted. Let's just say that those words, even if they are dastardly lies, completely fabricated, and he, of course, Trump so that can never be underestimated or taken out of the equation. But even so, wasn't necessarily what a lot of those Israeli parliamentary warmongers wanted to hear. Your reaction?
I think it's just important to step back and consider what it is the United States and Israel want from Iran. And Trump was being honest in that Truth Social post back during the Israeli aggression, which is unconditional surrender. Their problem with Iran is that Iran is sovereign. That's their problem with it. They do not like sovereign countries that make their own decisions. They like vassals. They like countries like, Egypt and Jordan and the Gulf regimes and the Europeans, the European Union, all these little poodles that do what they're told. That's what they want. They hate sovereign countries. That's why they hate Iran. That's why they hate China. That's why they hate Russia. That's why they hate Venezuela. And they gave the Nobel Peace Prize to this fanatical Zionist right-wing woman who is saying that, if she ever comes to power in Venezuela, she's going to sell everything off to American corporations, particularly the oil sector. She says that openly. So, of course, they love her for that.
And she wants Netanyahu's help to
Yeah,
overthrow the government.
basically, U.S. and Israel, please invade Venezuela.
Yeah, basically. So that's
this tells a lot about Norway, by the way, and this says a lot about these very civilized people and the Nobel Peace Prize and all that.
100%. But that's the bottom line. So the question is Iran ready to surrender its sovereignty against promises of, more fast food joints in Tehran or whatever it is you get from joining the declining American empire? So is Iran ready to surrender its sovereignty? Is Iran ready to sell out its principles? Is Iran ready to bow to Israel? Is Iran ready to, to surrender to an erratic, delusional figure like Donald Trump? I don't think you need to be an Iran expert to know that there's probably almost no constituency for that Iran. Yes, there may be a few, in every country, there are a few delusional people who worship the United States and who think the United States is like God. But I suspect that the vast majority of people in Iran don't want to give up their sovereignty and don't want to surrender to the United States and Israel, notwithstanding whether they want more cultural, what it is, exposure to this or, a different cultural liberal lifestyles or whatever it is they want. But that doesn't necessarily mean they want to see their country destroyed and surrender. So from that very basic set of principles, I can't see how Iran would be willing to do what Donald Trump says he wants them to do. And then also, even if Iran said, okay, we want to make a deal, we want to just get all this over with, how do you make a deal with these people when you don't know from one day to the next if they're going to stick to it, if they're going to murder you while you're negotiating with them? So it's just entirely delusional. And I suspect that in Tehran, in Beijing, in Moscow, in countries all over the world that aren't already poodles and vassals of the United States, they understand that you don't necessarily want to go into a full-scale war with the United States. You want to avoid that, like avoiding, a dangerous wounded animal. You want to stay far from it as much as you can, but you're certainly not going to offer yourself up to it.
Yeah, and quickly, as we wrap up here, Israeli media said it itself, Professor Marandi. The focus is shifting, even if there's all kinds of attempts to confuse the narrative. Israel's focus, this is Israel Hayom, focusing on shift is on Iran as the next war looms. So I just want to read this, where it says, they appear to be ahead, Israel and Iran, on a path toward renewed confrontations, buildup of ballistic missiles by Iran, and then, of course, this ongoing talk about enrichment at Natanz and a rebuild up of that. And then, of course, the sanctions and the lack of Iran negotiating now with both Europe and the United States as being possible triggers. All of this just sounds like recycled narratives. So, Professor Marandi, maybe we can close with a statement from each of you about where you see all of this heading.
Sure. I just, well, to be very brief, if there's another war, I'm sure the Israelis will slaughter innocent people as they do. That's what they in order to kill one scientist, they slaughtered 70 people in a building. That's just who they are. Just like in Lebanon, when they would bomb apartment blocks and bring them down, and what the Western journalists in Beirut were calling these Hezbollah strongholds, they knew they were lying too, just like the Israeli regime, because their fixers were from these neighborhoods, their drivers were from these neighborhoods. They just knew that they were bombing people. So in the West, if they bomb, destroy, bring down a building in Tehran, they'll call it an intelligence coup instead of what it really is, and that is just mass murder. Because everyone's home, everyone, people know where they live. People live in ordinary homes in Tehran, just as they do in other countries. But one thing that I'd like to just touch upon very briefly, and that is that one of the things that has been exposed is that this Orientalist stereotype in the West, among Western elites, has been demolished. They always say that, like in the West, they have civil society and they have checks and balances, and that the state is not dependent on people and that sort of thing. And of course, they're oligarchies, as we've seen, especially now in the United States, where the Zionist oligarchs are increasingly in charge, and as Trump admitted in Palestine himself. But we've seen the Israeli regime murder commanders in Iran, in Gaza, in Lebanon. We've seen them murder politicians. We've seen them murder scientists. We've seen them murder people from civil society. Iran is not dependent on any individual. Hezbollah and the resistance is not dependent on individuals. Even though Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah was one of the greatest men of our era, Gaza and Palestine is not dependent on individuals, even though Yahya Sinwar is an icon of resistance for the world. There are thousands of Yahya Sinwars. There are thousands. We are all Nasrallah. And in Iran, it's the same. So the next time they attack, they will lose. There's no doubt that the Israeli regime will lose. So why will they probably attack? Because this regime is not rational. The Zionists are not rational. They are bringing about their own destruction. The fact that the world despises them is because of their own stupidity, because they have not behaved rationally for 2 years now. Netanyahu is fighting for his political survival, to stay out of jail. He's aligned himself with the most fanatical of the fanatics, but they're destroying the Israeli regime. So we shouldn't expect irrational people to behave in a rational way.
Yeah. Final thoughts, Ali, before we close.
I just want to emphasize again that the solidarity from people all over the world has been absolutely crucial to this global sea change in support for Palestinian liberation and in isolating the governments. Yes, they're still very powerful, but these governments that support this genocidal regime are increasingly isolated and exposed even before their people. So just to thank people and say, keep it up. Your solidarity makes a difference. Don't relent. We have to keep going. Nothing has been solved yet. This is just a reprieve for the people of Gaza and the people of Palestine more generally. And when Palestine is liberated, I really do believe that is the keystone to liberation in so many ways for people all over the world, to free us from the grip of this bloodthirsty empire.
No, I totally agree with that. It's just even just from the standpoint of these countries like China, Russia, Iran trying to build a multipolar world. Free Palestine is really the only way
of
to
the United
win.
States.
Yeah. Oh, and that
Yeah,
too.
it's to
Yeah. in
For
that.
the Israeli regime to just fall apart, it's to the benefit of the United States, it's to the benefit of Europe, it's to the benefit of everyone.
Of course, yeah.
And
everyone.
most importantly, perhaps alongside the Palestinians, it's to the benefit of Jews who are against this genocidal regime.
Right. Indeed. Everybody, be sure the video description has that article that we were talking about earlier that Ali published, citing a key source on what kind of predicted this genocide and why it's important then to put that in the context of the resistance. So be sure to check that out on Electronic Intifada and also support Electronic Intifada. You can find all the places to support this channel in the video description below as well, Patreon, Substack, and much more. Without further ado, everyone, thanks so much for watching. I want to thank everyone who gave a super chat. I'll just put that up on the screen really quick. Sorry, I cannot read them faster or with more care, but I do appreciate all of you who support this channel. Thanks to all the moderators, and of course, thanks to all the viewers. And until next time, take care and bye-bye.